How do we connect with students in our ministry? How do we reach new students? And how do we partner with others? This might seem especially difficult in our world today, given all of the changes that have been going on in recent years. But today, our guest has some amazing ideas to push past all the noise in the digital world and to use it to increase our reach and our ability to connect. We'll talk about what we should do and what we shouldn't do in student ministry in the modern age. Get ready for Student Ministry Connection. Welcome to Student Ministry Connection, a place for those who serve in student ministry, who want to connect with others and have a desire to grow. My name is Steve Cullum, and I'll be your host for this episode, and we're so grateful that you are here. Today, we're going to be hearing from Dave Adamson. Dave is most known to people in the world as Aussie Dave. He is currently the director of Orange for Australia and New Zealand. He has written several books, and he was actually the 8th person in the world to have the title of online pastor. We're going to talk to him about his story, also his recent book called MetaChurch, How to Use Digital Ministry to Reach People and Make Disciples. We're going to talk to him about all the things that student ministry should be doing and shouldn't be doing in our modern digital world in order to reach students, to connect with them, and to share the gospel. We're also going to talk about how we can connect with each other in our world today, too. So I hope you're ready for this conversation with Dave Adamson. Before we jump into that, though, I want to remind you to subscribe to the podcast on any of your favorite podcast apps. And for those of you who subscribe on Spotify, I do want to let you know that there are currently 2 feeds on there for some reason. We're going to be condensing those down to 1. So if your feed goes away, just make sure you search and find us again and subscribe to the other feed. So I just want to give you that heads up. We're not going to do that right away, but it's going to be happening very soon. And I just wanted to make sure that you know if your feed on Spotify goes away, just subscribe to the other feed that's on there. We're going to try to condense those 2 feeds down to 1. And unfortunately, there's no way of combining them. We've got to delete one and just stick with the other. So if your feed does go away on Spotify, just search for the other one and subscribe that way. We're also on all the other major podcast apps out there and services, so you can subscribe and make sure you get every new episode right in your podcast inbox whenever they drop. We also want to take a moment to thank the sponsor of this episode of Student Ministry Connection. G-Shades is a youth ministry curriculum and teaching strategy focused on helping students see everyday life situations through the lens of the gospel. G-Shades has options to fit everyone as well, with 3 plans to choose from. This curriculum gives you the resources that you need to do what you do better. Do you need message outlines, a discussion guide, and a game? That's just $20 a month. If you're looking for a higher production value, including bumper videos, Instagram devotionals, and parent guides, that's $30 a month. And if you want an affordable, engaging video curriculum, G-Shades has you covered for only $40 a month. You will not find a better youth ministry video curriculum at that price point anywhere. G-Shades really sets itself apart by looking at every life situation that a student goes through the lens of the gospel and infusing Jesus on everything that the students do. If you want to learn more about G-Shades and its creator, Mike Haynes, be sure to check out episodes 32 and 55. We are so grateful for G-Shades, and we know that you will not be disappointed. So head over to gshades.org, that's GSHADES.org, to download Season 4 of G-Shades curriculum, and use the promo code CONNECTION at checkout to receive an extra $20 off your order. G-Shades, seeing life through the lens of the gospel. Thank you, G-Shades, for sponsoring this episode of the podcast. You can find the link to G-Shades in the podcast show notes. One last thing before we jump into this conversation with Dave Adamson, we're going to be giving a copy of his book, MetaChurch, away. All you got to do is head over to our social media. We're at StuMinConnect on Twitter and at Student Ministry Connection on Instagram. Make sure you follow us on social media, and you'll find the exact details of how to enter to win a copy of his book. Well, Dave, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Steve, it is so great. I'm glad that we could make this happen.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know we've kind of briefly connected here and there, usually through Orange Conference and things like that, but it's always been kind of a quick hi as I'm passing by and things like that. So it's great to sit down with you for a little bit today and talk
Yeah.
about all that you've been able to do. I know that you were an online pastor back before, COVID forced us all to start thinking about that way. You've written a book recently called MetaChurch, which we'll dig into a little bit today. You've worked for Orange for a while, and
Yep.
I think one of the coolest things about you, Dave, is that you are a very forward thinker in terms of the church. I like all
Thank
the
you.
times that I've heard you speak or read your stuff. It's always very forward thinking and how we should be thinking as a church, which is really, really cool. Um,
Thanks.
so before we dig into the book and all things about forward thinking with student ministry and everything, I'd love for our audience just to connect with you a little bit today. So
Yeah.
if you could share a little bit about your story and how God got you to the point where you are today.
Yeah. Well, look, I think how I would typically condense my story into a thumbnail version is, I grew up in the western suburbs of Melbourne, Australia, in a house that was completely unchurched and had no intention of ever becoming a Christian, no desire to be a Christian, and completely unaware of that world until I was in year 11 at high school, so junior in high school. And I got stuck with this kid. So I went to this state school, this state high school, never went to high school ministries or anything along those lines, which, I'm thankful to your audience for all the work they put into student ministries, because I benefited from it as a dad, but I didn't benefit from it as a kid because I just had no interest in that space. And then when I was a junior in high school, I went to a state school. There was only, I don't know what you or your audience knows about Australia, but Australia is a largely post-Christian culture, has been for a long time. And even back when I was in high school, it really was. And so I went to a high school where there was only 3 Christians in the entire school. And I got stuck in a computer class with one of those 3 Christians. I had to do a project with him for 6 weeks. And so, I started bombarding him with questions about the Bible and about God and Jesus and church and, you name it. And this kid, I mean, he answered all of my questions. And if he didn't know the answer, he would always say, "Hey, I don't know the answer to that, but my dad's a pastor, and I'll ask him, and we'll figure it out together." And so, really, for the first time, I had somebody who was answering some of my big questions about life and about purpose and about hope, but also about faith as well. And so, at the end of those 6 weeks, the 6 weeks of that project, he invited me to come along to this Christian event. And before I knew it, I'd made a decision to start following Jesus. Didn't know what that meant at all, but started going to the local church. And within a couple of months of being at that church, the pastor asked me if I would preach. And so I did. I was like 17. I didn't know what
Wow.
I was doing. I just assumed that this is what you did. You become a Christian, and then you preach, and then you get baptized. Like, I just assumed, because I didn't grow up with any of that background or baggage.
Mhm.
I just did whatever somebody told me to do. But even back then, I didn't want to be a pastor or be in full-time ministry. I don't want that. I wanted to be a sports reporter. So I went to college, got a degree in journalism and literature, and started pursuing a career as a sports journalist, and ended up working for Australia's version of ESPN Sports Center for one of our major networks here, and did that for 7 or 8 years. This was like in the early 2000s. And in 2008, God really put an opportunity in front of my wife and I. We had 3 young girls at the time, and put an opportunity in front of us to pack up everything and move to New Jersey and go into full-time ministry as an online pastor. This was 2008. And little did I know back then, ultimately we accepted that opportunity because we believed God was calling us to it. But little did I know that the skills and experiences that I'd been developing over 7 or 8 years, from a communication point of view, from a on-camera hosting point of view, from a production point of view, God had been using those to get me to this point in 2008 to go into full-time ministry as the 8th online pastor in the world. And all of those skills started to come together in a way that I could never have predicted. So, while I didn't want to be in full-time ministry, I feel like God had been playing, 3D chess with me the whole way.
Yeah.
And he knew, and he was prepping me. And I'm sure that a lot of people who listen to this podcast who are in ministry, probably, if you look back, you probably feel the same way, that God had been prepping you long before you got called into full-time ministry. And so, I became the 8th online pastor in the world in 2008 at a church in New Jersey. And then in 2013, I got an opportunity to take a full-time position at North Point Church in Atlanta, Georgia, where Andy Stanley is the senior pastor. And I became the online and social media pastor there, and did that until 2020, when in the middle of a global pandemic, I decided to make a huge transition, and I started working for Orange, which is a family ministries curriculum company, a church strategy company out of Atlanta. And so now I live in Australia. I'm the Orange director for Australia and New Zealand, and get to connect with churches, not just here in Australia and New Zealand, but also around the world, helping them with their online and digital strategy, and helping, student ministry and family ministry leverage technology to connect with parents and really partner with parents when it comes to raising and sharing their faith with the next generation.
That's awesome. And what I all of those things are great, but the thing that I immediately jumped to is that high school kid who shared his faith. He actually, that's what we all dream of as youth pastors, have that one all-star kid that actually does what we ask him to do and share their faith with someone, and look at the ripple effect that has left and since then in his life, and then your life, and so many others that have been impacted along the way. That's so awesome, and an encouragement to those of us that are in student ministry that it really does matter what we do.
Yeah, it does. And giving student pastors and student small group volunteers and those people who are pouring into those kids, it really does have an impact, especially when it comes to answering the questions that students have, especially unchurched students have. The way that I look at it now, in a lot of ways, that kid to me was Google to current kids, was YouTube to current students, right? So, in the modern world, back when I was in high school, if you had questions about faith, if you had questions about God or the Bible, you either went to church or you went to the only person you knew who was experiencing those things, right? And in my world, that was this kid in my computer studies class. But in the modern world, in this post-Christian world that we live in, if kids have questions about faith and about God and about Jesus, about the Bible, about faith, they're not going into the church. They're going to YouTube to ask those questions. And this is where, I'm a really big advocate for churches and student ministries to be leveraging social media, leveraging every piece of technology we have to teach people how to share their faith and to be answering questions that students are actually asking in the modern world. I think too often churches fall into the habit of answering questions that no one is asking, but we need to be aware of what are the questions that students are asking today, and how can we provide answers to those questions? Because they're asking them, they're just asking them online instead of in church. And so if we can be in those places, knowing what those questions are, and then answering those questions, that's when we can really move the ball forward in somebody's faith. And if I can go one step further, it actually means that we don't have to rely necessarily on that all-star student who's going to share their faith with everybody. We can actually put ourselves in those positions where we're the all-star who's sharing their faith, but we're just doing it in a medium that the kids are actually accessing in order to find answers to the questions they're asking.
That's cool. And I've actually made it about 75% of your book so far. I'm doing the audio version, which is awesome because I get to hear from you. But I love it so much for a few different reasons. One is because I think you just have a great way of articulating things so well that just instantly resonate with me. So that's really awesome. But also I think you do a really good job of not only being sharing these ideas and being forward thinking, but also getting very practical and some basic steps that ministries can take. And I know recently I read about how you were saying, here's some basic steps around YouTube specifically to start addressing questions, like you were saying, instead of just throwing a video out there, but how can we start using even our sermon videos, cutting them down to address specific questions.
Yeah.
So before we jump into any more details, I'd love if you wouldn't mind provide a brief just overview of your book and maybe share a little bit about what led you to actually write it.
Yeah, well, the reason I wrote it and the brief overview is, during COVID, live stream became mainstream, right? All these churches around the world, student ministries around the world, family ministries around the world, schools around the world had to suddenly move to this online scenario, online only scenario. And, I was at North Point at the time, and a lot of my time and energy and attention went into helping churches get the technology to be able to start live streaming. Like, I remember in those early days, I was pushing for student ministry volunteers and youth pastors to buy this microphone off Amazon, which was a Shure MV80, which was a microphone that had a connection that plugged into your iPhone. And I kept saying, that's all you need. It's all you need. Face the window for light. You've got $1,000 camera in your pocket. Just buy this microphone. And then within 2 weeks, that microphone was sold out because everybody was trying to get it, because everybody was moving and shifting to online, right? And so what I decided in those months, I was answering so many questions around how do I do this online thing, that I started writing. So I just thought to myself, I've got to write down all these things I've learned since 2008, all these experiences that God had given me, all the failures that I'd made, all the bad decisions, all the tech things that we tried and experimented and it didn't work, as well as the things that did work, and put them all into one space. So, people say, hey, how long did it take you to write the book? And I always say it took me like 14 years to write the book, because it was everything I've learned about online ministry and connection points, how to connect with people in an online world, how to disciple people using digital tools, how to take Jesus's first century model of discipleship and apply a 21st century model to it. And so it really was a collection of all these things. And to your point, Steve, I didn't want this to be a theoretical book. I didn't want it to be a book that just said, hey, here's how you set up a camera to live stream to TikTok. I wanted it to be a book that helped people build a strategy that was contextualized for them. For me, one of the big learnings I've had over the past 14 or so years in online ministry is that content is not king on social media. Context is king on social media. And so we need to create a strategy that is contextualized to the students that we're trying to reach in the town that God has placed us in the church that God has placed us in. And so, part of doing that is understanding, yes, how YouTube works, but then creating the context that is contextualized to the people in your community. You talked about, some of the questions and stuff that I've been asking. One of the things I've learned recently, and this actually came at the tail end of the book, I started doing some work in Australia with a company called Alpha, which I'm sure a lot of, you and a lot of your audience have heard of. Alpha is that, the group that does that 12-week course where people ask their questions about faith and have them answered, right? Which is right up YouTube's alley. This is YouTube 101. And so as I started working with Alpha Australia, one of the things we did was I said, we need to be reaching people who have questions about faith. YouTube's the best place for us to do that. So why don't we research and find out what the top 100 most frequently asked faith questions online in Australia, so contextualized in Australia, what are those top 100 faith questions people are asking online? And so we did a whole bunch of research, found out exactly what those top 100 questions are. And with Alpha, we just started creating videos that were less than 4 minutes long, because the average length of a YouTube video is around 4 minutes and 20 seconds. And so how do we find those questions and then start answering them in a way that people are actually going to consume them? And so one of the things, that this is post-book, like this is the stuff that came out post-book, is leveraging that idea of YouTube and creating a strategy around answering the questions that people are actually asking. And I thought to myself during this process, what if the average student pastor found out what are the top 50 questions that students are asking around faith, Jesus, God, the Bible and church in your local community. What are those top 50 questions? There's a whole year worth of content. You add Easter and Christmas to that, there's 52 weeks covered. And you're answering questions that students are actually asking. And this all just stemmed from me writing this book and, then taking it, what's the next thing beyond that? And so, that's a large part of what the book is about, but also a large part about what I'm talking with churches about at the moment is answering those questions that people actually have in the community where God has specifically called you to serve.
That's awesome. That's so cool. And I love you're, already getting into how we can contextualize it for student ministries in our own area. I was talking to someone else the other day and just talking about the importance of contextualization is so key. So for those of that are working in student ministry, many of us probably don't have the ability to impact our entire church, but we have, some influence over our little corner of our area. So, what are some things that student ministry workers, volunteers, paid ministry workers can actually start beginning to think about and start implementing no matter their context? I love how you're talking about YouTube and things like that, but are there anything else that we should be considering as we're talking about how to impact these students in our community digitally?
Yeah. So obviously what I just mentioned is a huge one for me, is figure out what the questions, what are the questions the students who are not coming to your church, what are the questions that they are asking? How do you start reaching those students? So that would be a big part of it, is finding out what those questions would be in your context. Another part of it is asking the question of what platforms are the students using nowadays and how are they using them? I think it's too easy for us in church world to assume that everybody's on Instagram and Facebook, but that's not necessarily the case. I've got a church that I'm working with here in Australia, in Brisbane, Australia, who just put in a Minecraft server in their church because they want all the local kids, when they start playing Minecraft, to become part of that server so that they can connect with those kids. And I'm like, that is the most innovative thing I've heard in a long time. And it's not that, because Minecraft is not new. What's exciting is how they're leveraging this new piece of tech, how they're in a new way that's contextualized, because they just figured out there's a lot of students around our church that play Minecraft. Let's build a server where they can come to us in a way that's pertains to the way that they specifically use the online technology. So little things like that. What are the ways that you can innovate that are unique to your students, that are unique to your kids? Are your kids on Twitch? What are you doing on Twitch? Do they use Discord? What are you doing on Discord? We often look to the big things like Facebook, Instagram, TikTok now, and think that that's where the answers are. But it's how we leverage those tools that make a difference in the lives of the students that we're called to serve. How are we connecting them? And then even, dude, the amount of times that I speak with churches and student ministry leaders who are constantly saying, hey, I'm always trying to create new content and that's taking up so much of my time and I get so discouraged and I'm constantly on the move and I'm constantly trying to come up with the next post. Don't post. Why don't you take a break from posting content as your church ministry, your youth ministry or your church youth program? Stop posting content and instead start listening to what the students are posting. Start putting all your time into commenting on the posts that your students are putting out on social media. Start reading those and responding as the student ministry to those churches. Because otherwise it just comes out that we're talking at people, not talking with people. So, this is when I talk to churches about this, whether it's in the US, Europe, or Australia, and I say, hey, instead of constantly talking at people, why don't you start talking with them by not posting on your own thing and just commenting on all the stuff that your students are talking about? Man, that seems like it's such a new and innovative way of leveraging social media, but it's called social media.
Yeah.
We often forget the social part.
Yep.
And what I can tell you is this, as a dad to 3 daughters who grew up in student ministry, when the student ministry comments and responds to a post that they've put on their own TikTok, their own Instagram accounts, the return on that investment is huge. I've seen my girls, scream in their rooms and come running down and go, "Oh my gosh, Dad, they retweeted me, or they reposted me, or they commented on my post." Like, that return is huge, because it makes students feel like they're heard. It makes them feel like they're seen, and it makes them feel like their leaders care about the stuff that is important to them, rather than just the ministry always leveraging social media to invite students to events. They're using social media to invite students to conversations. And that's where life change starts to happen. If I could talk about it from a technical point of view, I think often when some, a student ministry person hears somebody like myself say, "You should be using YouTube more," they think, "Wow, that's great, but it's too daunting. It's YouTube. I've got to get cameras and lights and blah, blah, blah." No, I keep saying, you've got a $1,000 camera in your pocket. The best light source in the world is the sun. So all you need to do is just get that camera out of your pocket and start being authentic, because highly personal is greater than highly produced. Highly personal content is greater than highly produced content. When you overproduce something in student ministry world, that creates that makes a post. That's all it does. When you create highly personal content, that makes a difference. And as student ministry people, you want to make a difference, not just make content. So you don't want to just make posts. So if you can get on and leverage the tools that you have and be highly personal and contextualized to the things that your students are talking about in the way that they're talking about it on the platform that they're talking about, that's when you make a difference in the world.
That's so good. I realized that even in in-person ministry, things that worked for my generation were the big lights, the production, all that stuff. And our students get that everywhere they turn now. So it's not as special at church or a youth group anymore. They respond to the authenticness. They respond to the transparency. Exactly. They respond to like people stepping down on their level and, oh, they actually got to know me. That person on stage like stepped down, shook my hand, and asked me how I was doing. Like, that's what they really respond to. Because
that is real relevance, right? Often in church world, we think being relevant is having a really good lighting system, playing the coolest music, having smoke machines. That's what we often think is relevant. But what real relevance is meeting somebody's need in the moment that they need it the most. So, for example, Steve, if I've been stranded out at sea with just a life jacket for 2 days, and you show up with a boat and a bottle of water for me and pull me out, I don't care what brand boat you bring. I don't care what brand water you bring. I don't care what you're wearing. I don't care what music is playing on the boat, right? What I care about is you've met my need in the moment when I most needed it. That's what Google calls that the zero moment of truth. When people have this need in the moment they need it, and somebody comes and resolves that issue. A way that students might often look at it, I'll put it into my world. I'm a photographer. I will often type into Google, what is the best camera to buy in 2022, right? And companies like Sony and Canon and Nikon and Fuji pay huge amounts of money to be there in my zero moment of truth as a consumer. But in student world, man, the zero moment of truth comes when a student types into Google or YouTube or TikTok or Instagram and says, how do I find hope for my life? How do I find purpose? How do I stop being anxious? How do I stop looking at porn? These are the zero moments of truth that your students are having every single day. And we need to be there in those moments and not worry about the highly produced answers to those questions, but the highly personal answers to those questions is what's going to make a difference in the life of your students.
That's so good. And I love how you said earlier, we need to contextualize the social media we go on and things too, because I think so often we think we have to be everywhere. And that becomes overwhelming. Like, how am I going to post on Instagram and Facebook and TikTok and whatever the new thing is all the time? But to start learning where our students are, where the students in our community are, and just go there, that's huge. So that leads me to ask, like, what are some other things that we shouldn't be doing anymore? Or maybe we should be doing less in order to put our focus on the right things moving forward?
Well, look, one of the things I would be saying is for some churches, the most innovative thing they could do is to stop streaming their services online, to stop streaming live their student ministry things. And the reason for that is those things, again, are just those big one-off event things, those event moments. Man, Jesus's first century model of discipleship was to be in the lives of the 12 young men that he called his disciples. He was in their life 24/7. He was constantly connecting with them and showing them what it means to follow Jesus. He wasn't just inviting them to come once a week and then telling them what it means to follow him. He was showing them on a regular basis. And it's interesting to me when we read Acts 2:40, Acts chapter 2, everybody in ministry loves Acts chapter 2 because it's like the blueprint, right? And we especially love Acts 2:47, which says every day the Lord added to the number those who were being saved. And especially in student world, we love the salvation stories, right? We love that. And we all want our student ministries to grow, not just because of numbers, and we could talk about this, but because we know it's having an impact on the students in our local area.
Yeah.
So we want Acts 2:47, but Acts 2:46 says, and every day they met together in people's homes and in the marketplace and in the community centers. So we want the Acts 2:47 payoff, but we're not willing to put in the Acts 2:46 work. We just invite them to this once a week event. Come to this one-off thing every Sunday at a time and a location that's suitable to us, right?
Yep.
I think by leveraging technology, by leveraging social media, we can be in their lives every day. We can meet with them every day. We can give them an example because, it should be the student social media should be the student pastors, the student small group volunteers revealing to the students how they live their lives as much as anything else. You know what I mean? Here's Pastor Steve posting, hey, here's the 4 books that I'm reading at the moment that have most transformed my faith. Students will look at that and go, okay, I want to check out those books. I want to check out, here's a video that I watched that really captured my imagination when it comes to evangelism or when it comes to serving the local community, and posting those videos. What I think we tend to in church world is we think the only good content for our students is the content we produce. Yet there's so much other good stuff out there. I leverage Mr. Beast all the time when I'm preaching conferences and things.
Yeah.
And most of the people who are above like 40 are like, who's Mr. Beast?
Yeah.
But everybody who's, below 30 are like, oh, Mr. Beast is the best. Yeah. Because there's so many practical things you can learn from a guy like Mr. Beast. So why aren't we sharing those things with our students? Part of the thing, I think part of the reason is, and you asked, what should we stop? I think we should stop seeing online as a broadcast medium. Whether it's YouTube, social media, or the church live stream, it's not a broadcast medium, it's a narrowcast medium. And if we can start to see it as that, what we do is we narrowcast to the students who God has placed under our care, and we narrowcast to them by interacting with them on a constant basis, by commenting on their posts, by engaging with them and not just expecting them to come to us. And it's about talking about the things that are narrowcasted to them and what the situations they're facing in their local community, in their schools, rather than broadcasting this thing that we think is the answer to the answer to the questions we think they're asking. So I would be constantly, if I was if I could talk to all student ministry leaders, I would be constantly saying, what are the tools, what are the platforms, what are the channels that the students in your context are using, and what are the questions they're asking, and then answer those questions on the platforms and on the channels that they're actually utilizing. Don't assume that you know those things. Ask the questions. And these things, I know this from being a dad. Those things change like every 3 months.
Yeah.
It used to be TikTok. Now it's not TikTok. Now they're moving to other places, whether it's Twitch, whether it's Minecraft servers, you know what I mean? So being aware of that is the key.
Yeah, that's huge. And I think you've already given us a lot to think about, I think, which is so cool because again, just like your book, it's not like all these things that we need to do. It's just changing our mindset a little bit to refocus what we're actually doing and how we're going to accomplish that. And it's really just back to the basics of let's connect with our audience, like connect with our potential audience.
And you know why that is, man? I just think that, oh gosh, hey, if this is the only thing your audience hears, okay, if this is the only thing they take away, is this: you guys do a lot in student ministry world. You guys do more than the average person could possibly know. So as a pastor and as a dad, I just want to say, first of all, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for all the effort that you put in. Thank you for all the time and energy, and for all the sleepless nights, for all the stress and anxiety, for all the conversations you all have with your coworkers, your peers, for all the conversations you have with your spouses and partners, like that where you're trying to come to the answer, or you're talking with them about the problems that a kid is facing, or a student group. Or thank you for all of those sleepless, anxiety-ridden nights. Thank you for all the deep study. Thank you for all the research. Thank you for all the times you pick up garbage around the church, and for all the times you stack chairs, and for all the times you have to vacuum marshmallow out of the carpets, for all the times that you go the extra length to go to a student's event or a student's sports games. Thank you for all of those things that you do that are unseen. The last thing I would want to do is add more to your plate. I don't want you to do more things. I don't want to tell you that you should be doing this and you shouldn't be doing that. I want to say thank you. And I also want to say there's a way to work that is more efficient than ever before. And it might mean not posting to social media, not searching through Unsplashed every week to try to find just the perfect post to get more kids to come. It might just be responding to some kids' social media posts, some year 11 students' social media, some senior students' TikTok, and just saying, hey, I see you. That was hilarious. Thank you for sharing that. Those little things are the things that build relational equity with the students. And once you have that, that's when you have genuine influence over them. And also as a dad, I know the significant impact that a student pastor, a student volunteer, a small group volunteer can have on a student, because I see it in my own girls' lives. I see them still texting the small group leader that they had in middle school and asking them questions that they won't ask me as a dad, even though I think I have all the answers. So thank you for all of that work. And I'm not asking you to do more. I just think there's a way that we could be more efficient and more effective that honors your time a little bit more, but allows the work that you put in to reach more kids and to have a deeper impact on kids' lives.
That's so good. That's so good. So turning our attention to those that are working in student ministry, you've already kind of turned that page a little bit, which is awesome. How would you continue to encourage them, especially those that are feeling, we were working with teenagers who want to be seen, who want to be heard. But often those of us that are in ministry, and I just know my little corner of student ministry, often we don't feel seen. We don't feel heard. We're not connected nearly as much as we should be. What kind of encouragement would you have for us, especially in our digital world today?
Yeah, gosh, dude, that's such a good question. Apart from saying thank you again to to all that you guys do, I would be encouraging you to get around people from other churches and hear the stories and share stories with each other. I really think local communities in a town, all the student ministry people should get together. Too often we compare ourselves. We go through this we fall into the comparison trap too often. How many kids does the student ministry down the road have? How many students streamed their services how many followers do they have on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube? You know what I mean? We get into this comparison trap. But what if you reached out to the people in the church down the street, to the youth pastors, to the student ministry volunteers, and just created a space where you all get together, you all have a coffee together once a month or something, and you just shared stories and encouraged each other and cheered each other on. Like, we should be cheering each other on more than any other group in the community, right? More than any other group in the community. Church leaders should be cheering on the other church leaders in their vicinity. And I think this is especially true and especially relevant in student ministry world. I think the thing that stops us is that, unfortunately, we in church world, a lot of us in church world, especially those of us in leadership, those of us who have a platform, like, are on stage. We get our self-esteem and we get our self-worth from how many kids are sitting in front of us, how many students are watching, how many students are following. And I think our self-esteem shouldn't come from those things. First and foremost, we should be measuring our self-worth and our self-esteem based on the fact that Christ died for us. But second, we should be encouraging the people around. What if our measurement of success, right, was how deeply connected we are with the other people from other churches who are trying to reach the same students that we're reaching in whatever town, state, county, region that we're all serving in together? What if that was our measure of success? How often we all got together and cheered each other on? Wouldn't that be game changing? Yeah. Like, I live in this place in Australia called the Sunshine Coast, right? And it's a very clearly defined, it sounds amazing, right? Sunshine Coast, we're right by the ocean, like, it's awesome. But I know, I'm just, as I'm saying this, dude, I'm thinking of the number of churches and the number of student ministry leaders in this little context that I have here. And there must be, I don't know, maybe 20 churches. I would love to facilitate something. And now I'm feeling challenged that I should be the one who does this, to facilitate all of these student ministry people getting together and just cheering them on, just cheering each other. One of the things my wife and I did when we first got here, I'm going to speak to a different level of the audience, because I'm going to say that there's potentially senior pastors, potentially parents who are listening to this podcast as well, or watching this. And I want to speak to you guys. When my wife and I first moved to this area and our kids started connecting with the local church, the first thing we did was we took the student ministries team out for lunch, and we paid, and we just said, we're here to cheer you on, and we're here to support you, and we're here to encourage you. And when life gets tough, we want to be able to hold your hands up and support you. When you've got questions, we want to be here to bounce ideas off. We just want to support you guys. That should be the measurement of success in the church world. Again, senior pastor, if you're listening to this, one of the biggest lessons I learned in my time at North Point in Atlanta, one of the biggest, most influential churches on the planet, was that the growth engine of your church is not your preaching. It's not what happens in adult big church. The growth engine of your church, the growth engine, I believe, of any church is family ministries. It's what's happening in student world. And you need to pour all of your time and energy and resources into student work. Student and family ministry should have the biggest section of the budget pie, in my opinion, because more often than not, what's connecting parents and what's connecting adults to church is the kids having such a great relevant experience, the students having such being seen and being heard by their local church. They're bringing the parents, they're bringing the adults with them. And I get that we think that what happens in main church is important, and it totally is. But man, as Andy Stanley always says, what's it worth to share your faith with the next generation? What price are you willing to pay? I know as a dad, I'm willing to pay anything. I'll pay any price. I'll do anything. Does that mean I have to preach shorter sermons? I'll preach shorter sermons in big church if it means that more students are coming to my student ministry program. If it means more kids are coming to my family ministry program, I will preach shorter. I'll cut the worship team song down to like 2 songs and a 15-minute message. If that was what would drive more students and more kids coming to my church. The growth engine of your church is family ministries. We should resource it in that way. I don't know if I answered your question. I got on a bit of a soapbox.
That's good, man. You're almost making me emotional though, because you're talking about my language, of course, and I think so many of us that are listening to the podcast, you're talking our language too, and I think that it's important for us to feel seen and heard and feel valued. And so I think what you did was, for me, right there, you spoke value into what I do.
Awesome.
And I think, and I hope you did that for our audience as well. And I think that's really important, because we need to hear those things to keep us moving forward, because we don't always see those life changes happen. Like every once in a while we do see, an all-star kid who actually reaches out and shares their faith with, several of their schoolmates, but a lot of times that doesn't happen, and maybe we'll get a thank you 30 years down the line. But we need to be encouraged along the way.
Yeah, I think one of the ways you could be encouraged along the way, Steve, and again, this is speaking directly to family ministries, but especially student ministries. And again, speaking from my own experience, you asked before, what's one thing we should stop doing or one thing we should start doing, right? It's not technologically based at all. I would say start partnering with the parents.
Mm.
Because the reality is, right, I know this as a dad. My kids would go to the student ministry, student ministry at our church every week. But those student leaders, they got maybe an hour, 2 hours a week with the kids, maybe three if you add a small group experience to it. The bulk of the time was me as a dad, my wife as a mom, pouring our faith into our kids, right? So I think, I think if student leaders put a lot of their attention, or as much of their attention as they could, into asking questions of the parents and partnering with the parents and sharing their faith, I think that would be a huge thing. So if you want to use Facebook, don't use Facebook to reach the kids, use Facebook to reach the parents, to say, hey, parents, here are the things we talked about in student ministry world this week. And here are 5 questions you can ask your teenagers when you pick them up from school or when you're driving them to their part-time job. 5 questions you can ask them this week that will enhance what we talked about on Sunday. As a parent, that is game changing. That is game changing, because here's what happens. We go and pick up our kids from student ministries and we go, hey, how was it? Good.
Yep.
Oh, what'd you talk about? Jesus. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's all we get. But if the student pastor is giving me questions that I can ask during the week, hey, how do you feel when somebody at school disrespects you? Well, I feel this, and this. And if that ties in with the respect message that was preached on Sunday at student ministry, that's where it really starts. That partnering with parents thing, I think, is such a key element. If you want to make a big difference, that little short period of time that you have is nothing compared to the time that the parent has. So let's partner with the parent to give them the tools they need. And this is one thing we learned during COVID, right? What we learned was when parents had to be the parent, the teacher, and the student pastor because churches were closed, most parents aren't resourced for that. Most parents don't know how to do that. So what if we started giving them tips? Hey, parents, here's 2 ways you can share your faith with your students this week that they won't even pick up on. Hey, parents, here's 3 questions you can ask from Sunday's message or from their small group experience to help you continue that conversation. Because I've never met a parent who's sending their kids to a student ministries program who does not want to see their kid grow and take the next step in their faith journey. So youth pastors, youth leaders, small group leaders, partner with parents and give them the tools they need to help you do the work that you're doing.
That's good. That's so good. Well, I know people are going to want to connect with you more, Dave. I know they're going to want to follow up on some questions. They're going to want to find your book and read it. What is the best place for people to connect with you online, since we're talking online?
Yeah, so I'm Aussie Dave at just about everything. AUSSIE Dave, Aussie Dave. So you can, follow me, hit me up, DM me, anything like that. But I want to go one step further for especially for the student people. I want to go one step further. If anything that I've said has made you ask questions, then I want to give you my email. I don't know if I'm okay to do that. I don't know if I really want to do that, but I feel like I'm supposed to do that because, I want to make it personal for you as well. I got saved because a kid made it personal for me. And made himself available to answer my personal questions. So I want to make myself available to answer your questions as well. So I'm not going to give you my work email address. I'm going to give you my personal, dave@daveadamson.tv, dave@daveadamson.tv. Shoot me an email and I will answer as many questions as I can because I just want to help you. I want to serve you. I want to cheer you on. I want to encourage you. I want to narrowcast to you and speak to your context. So if you've got any questions, email me, dave@daveadamson.tv.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dave. And yeah, Dave, it's been such a pleasure to have you on as a guest today, man, on the podcast. Really enjoying your book. Can't wait to finish it really soon. And man, just God bless all that you're doing for God's kingdom and all for you're doing for his workers.
And Steve, thank you, man. Thank you for putting time and energy into this and creating resources that student leaders can catch on to. And you're making a difference as well, man. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Ooh, that was a good one, right? I mean, I know I am still be a little emotional from all the truth and the encouragement that Dave provided, but also the great ideas that he has for us, ways that we can connect with our students, connect with more students, connect with each other. So many great things in there, and I know you're going to want to reach out to Dave, so please be sure to hit him up. I was so grateful that he was able to just freely give you his personal email address. So use that, reach out with some more questions that you might have for him. Also, check out his book. And if you want a chance to win a free copy, head over to our social media and we will be able to give you a chance to win a free copy of his book, MetaChurch. We also want to thank our sponsor of this episode, G Shades. Be sure to head over to gshades.org and use the code CONNECTION at checkout to save $20 off your order. Thank you so much, G Shades, for sponsoring this episode of Student Ministry Connection. And thanks to all of you for being here for another episode of the podcast. If some of you are thinking, hey, what's this Student Ministry Connection thing all about? I thought it was the Student Ministry Podcast. Be sure to go back to episode 85. I go into all the details about the new branding around the podcast and the bigger vision that God's been giving me. I'm really, really excited about the future. I'm really excited about this next few episodes as well. Already started doing some recording for those interviews. Got some other things that I'm going to be sharing over the next several episodes too. So make sure you've subscribed, make sure you're sharing with other people, and just be sure to be connected, be sure to keep growing, and may God bless your ministry.